They had been allies. They had fought beside each other, shared meals, and occupied the same island under the same flag. Then, on September 8, 1943, everything changed. Italy signed an armistice with the Allies, and within days, the Germans who had once called the Italians brothers turned their weapons on them. But before the massacre on Cephalonia that would shock the world, the Germans had already spent 2 years turning Greece into a place of starvation, fire, and mass graves. What they did before the killing of the Italians is a story that has never been told loudly enough. The island that Germany turned into a graveyard. Before a single Italian soldier was executed on Cephalonia, Germany had already been systematically destroying Greece for 2.5 years. Italy had initially invaded Greece in October 1940, and after their failure to conquer it, Hitler turned his military focus to the southern Balkans. A rapid blitzkrieg followed in April 1941, and by mid-May, Greece was under joint occupation by Germany, Italy, and Bulgaria. The occupation brought terrible hardships for the Greek civilian population. Over 300,000 civilians died from starvation alone, thousands more through deliberate reprisals, and the country's entire economy was stripped to the bone. 300,000 dead from starvation. That number tends to disappear in the larger shadow of the war. But Greece lost more of its civilian population to German-engineered famine than many countries lost in their entire military campaigns. And the famine was not an accident, or Hermann Göring's instruction to let Greeks starve. The German attitude toward the starving Greek population was not reluctant indifference. It was stated policy, written in explicit language by one of the most powerful men in the Third Reich. Hermann Göring expressed it in a letter to Reich commissioners and military commanders of occupied territories on August 6, 1942. He wrote, "This continual concern for the aliens must come to an end once and for all. I could not care less when you say that people under your administration are dying of hunger. Let them perish so long as no German starves." That was not a private thought. That was an official directive from the second most powerful man in Nazi Germany to the men administering occupied territories. Within the occupation zones, Germany confiscated fuel and all means of transportation, including fishing boats and pack animals, preventing any transfer of food across the country. Strategic industries were seized. Stocks of tobacco, olive oil, cotton, and leather were transferred to Germany. Farmers were taxed on their produce and forced to sell everything above subsistence level at fixed prices controlled by the occupiers. The villages Germany erased from the map. The village of Komeno tells that story with devastating clarity. On August 16, 1943, the day after one of the holiest festivals in the Greek Orthodox calendar, soldiers killed more than 300 residents, including nearly 75 children under the age of 10. There had been no confirmed attack to justify it, only a suspicion that guerrillas might be in the vicinity. A suspicion was enough to send soldiers into a village and execute 300 people, including 75 children. Even some of the soldiers carrying out the attack were horrified. One participant threw his cap at his commander's feet and said it was a disgrace that had nothing to do with fighting a war. The massacre continued anyway. Then came Kalavrita. On December 13, 1943, troops of the 117th Jaeger Division rounded up all men between the ages of 16 and 65, shot every one of them, and burned the town to the ground. A total of 700 people were killed, including 22 women and children. 24 surrounding villages and 3 monasteries were also destroyed. The Germans gave the operation a name. They filed reports on it. They reported it up the chain of command, and the chain of command approved. The Distomo massacre in June 1944 killed 218 civilians. The Lingiades massacre in October 1943 killed nearly 100 people in a village outside Ioannina. The Holocaust of Kedros in August 1944 saw 164 civilians executed and 9 villages dynamited. Each has a name. Each has a date. Each was carried out by the same German military machine that, in September 1943, turned its attention from Greek civilians to its former Italian allies on a small Ionian island. The Allies who became the enemy. By summer 1943, the war was turning. Sicily had fallen. Mussolini had been deposed. The new Italian government was secretly negotiating a surrender. Across Greece, German commanders watched the Italian garrisons they had fought alongside for years with growing suspicion. The Acqui Division had been the Italian garrison of Cephalonia since May 1943, consisting of 11,500 soldiers and 525 officers. Its commander, a General Antonio Gandin, was a decorated veteran of the Russian front who had earned the German Iron Cross. He was not an enemy of Germany. He had fought beside Germans. He had been honored by them. The execution of the Acqui. The Italians surrendered on September 22, 1943. The executions began almost immediately and continued for days, methodical and systematic, as though the Germans were processing a logistical problem rather than murdering surrendered prisoners of war. After September 24th, the remaining soldiers were marched to San Teodoro Town Hall and executed 8 at a time. General Gandin and 136 other officers were shot by firing squad, their bodies discarded at sea. Bodies across the island were cremated in massive pyres that filled the air with the smell of burning flesh, and others were thrown into the sea with rocks tied around them so they would not surface. The Germans refused to allow the dead to be buried. A chaplain who went searching for remains found bones scattered across the entire island. Some executions were carried out in full public view in Argostoli harbor, in front of the Greek civilian population who had been living under German occupation for 2 years. Those Greeks, the same people the Germans had been starving and massacring, quietly helped the few Italians who managed to survive. One wounded soldier was taken in by a Cephalonian woman and survived the war to live in Lake Como. Justice that never came. The story of Cephalonia was suppressed for decades. Only one German commander, General Hubert Lanz, was sentenced at Nuremberg, receiving 12 years. He lied to the tribunal, claiming fewer than a dozen officers were shot, and the rest transported to safety. He was partially believed because the evidence had been so thoroughly destroyed. He was released in 1951 and died in 1982. It was not until the 2001 release of the film Captain Corelli's Mandolin that public outcry in Italy and Greece forced a renewed reckoning. 2 German soldiers were eventually tried and convicted of genocide, 60 years after the massacre. 60 years. 2 convictions. For the murder of nearly 10,000 men. What Cephalonia means. The massacre of the Acqui Division sits at the intersection of 2 of the Second World War's most consequential stories. The story of what the German occupation did to Greece, the starvation, the village burnings, the 91,000 murdered civilians, the 800 destroyed communities, and the story of what happens when the machinery of mass murder is redirected overnight from civilians to surrendered soldiers. The men of the Acqui Division laid down their weapons in accordance with the laws of war. They were murdered for it, in groups of 8, their bodies thrown into the Ionian Sea with rocks around their necks so that history would struggle to find them. History found them anyway. It always does. And the least that history can do now is refuse to look away.